5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you can go.
Good evening, everyone. Here we are again with another round of interesting discussion to take place. Of course, this is a joint project by PIMA and PIM. This is the fourth webinar series, but we take a different form here, as we call it a virtual roundtable. So without taking much time, let me invite the PIMA President, Jailal Hewavasan, to welcome the panel and to take the webinar forward.
Thank you, Denzel. Yeah, as Denzel mentioned, actually we had earlier 3 webinars which were very successful back to back. Then this is a new one, this virtual roundtable. So welcome everybody on this live stream on our Facebook page. And for today's roundtable, we have selected 3 veterans in the industry. This is basically actually the topic is socio-economic perspective for policymaking for COVID-19. And the 3 veterans are first Mr. Lashman Abesekara, a PIMA product chairman of Sanford Development Bank, and then Mr. Nihal Ranasinghe, very senior government servant. He has been handling in many senior positions, secretary position at the Ministry of Education, then Immigration Department, and now actually he's working as a consultant at FLIDA. Then Dr. Trevor Mendes, Head of Academic Affairs at PIM. So with these 3 veterans, our panel moderator for the session today is our Professor Ajanta Dharmasiri, Director of PIM and our patron of PIMA. So this, as Dennis mentioned, joint project by PIM, PIMA together. So enjoy the evening. Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jalal, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Denzel and Ian, for having another successful initiative. Having done 3 webinars in the past, we got much encouragement based on the enthusiastic feedback we received from the participants. So today it's a different format. So we call it a virtual roundtable with some veterans. So it's a case of broadening our horizons, having a holistic view about what's going on. So we need to connect public sector, private sector, and of course, people in the post-COVID-19 pandemic. The way we currently tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, the way we are marching ahead steadily with confidence needs lots of courage and lots of commitment among the people representing public sector, private sector, and of course, people, the community at large. So today, our focus is socio-economic well-being of our mother nation. So we are slightly shifting from the past 3 webinars. It was more practical insights for business leaders. I mean, from business leaders to business people. Here it's more a policy perspective. So that's why we thought a better format like a round table would be more appropriate. So essentially, it's about the socio-economic well-being of our country and what needs to be done from a policy point of view, the broad, holistic point of view, from a macro point of view. And then it will have rich insights and very much relevant applications to business community and public alike. So certain decisions, certain imperatives to the government, and certain things the private sector should respond, and the civil society, what they need to do together. So it's a complex area that we are trying to cover. It's a fairly broad area that we're going to touch upon, and it will have lots of relevant insights. So I would encourage all the participants who have got connected through Facebook, please send your questions, and we will make it as interactive as much as possible. So now we see the silver lining in the dark cloud. With the clusters getting weakened, and we see we are now doing the looking up instead of locking down. So it's a looking up experience, looking at fresh prospects, fresh opportunities, fresh possibilities, rather than just locking down mentally, emotionally. So with that broad mindset, with that promising prospect that we see looming large. So let me ask the same question from all three panelists, starting with Dr. Trevor Mendes, my colleague at PIM. And also, I must tell you, it's a huge satisfaction that I get when I see prestigious PIM products. So all three webinars so far, we featured all premier PIM products. Similar today, we have all three products. They are really, they are the PIM pride. So from different circles, Mr. Niyal Ranasinghe did Master of Public Administration, and Mr. Lakshman did Master of Business Administration. So with Dr. Trevor Mendes, who did Master of Business Administration. So it is MPA, MBA combination today. And I must tell you, we are the premier provider of Master of Public Administration to the country, catering for the public administrators. And we outreach to Jaffna, Trinco, and Vavuniya through our blended learning approach using online. So when there's a sudden hue and cry about online, someone approached me, asked, how about PIM's online? I said, it's nothing new. We started online program for Master of Public Administration 7 years ago to outreach to the peripheries, to Jaffna, Trinco, and Vavuniya. So it's a case of blended learning experience for us. So with that backdrop, let me first turn to Dr. Trevor Mendes for his initial thought sharing with regard to socio-economic well-being of the nation. Over to you, Dr. Trevor Mendes, Head of Academic Affairs at PIM.
Thank you, Professor. COVID-19 is an unprecedented event in our era. Good evening, all of you. COVID-19 will definitely be there for the next 1 year or maybe even 2 years until we find a vaccine to overcome this. So definitely we have to live with COVID-19 for the next 1 year. But we can't forget the society. We can't just wait until the vaccine is discovered and introduced. So we have to move forward. So we have to come up with policies, or we have to formulate policies not only to overcome the social issues or the the issues in the public sector, corporate sector, but also to move forward and sometimes to convert those challenges into opportunities and to take the country to get greater heights. Now, how can we form? Because when you formulate a policy at government level, corporate sector take that policy formulation or policy to design their strategy. So there's a direct correlation between corporate sector strategy formulation based on the government policies and government policy formulation and the framework. So because a policy defines, or policy has certain parameters, how to act, what to do, when to act, and also the stance, position of the government, as well as the behavioral aspects. So based on these only, the corporate sector will design the strategies for them to move forward. So there's a direct correlation between these two. So how to start the policy formulation? The first step is to look for the impact assessment. Now, when you say impact assessment, it has to be done even when you basically sign a trade agreement with another country. But in this scenario, we have to look for certain other aspects in impact assessment. Example, what would be the outcome, or what are the outcomes due to this COVID-19, merits and demerits? Then how much, what is the extent, the depth, breadth, and the width? And then who are the affected people and who are the beneficiaries? Because there's another segment of beneficiaries as well. So you have to assess them. And then the risk has to be assessed. Pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages. If we move ahead with this particular aspect, what would be the outcome? What are the repercussions? What are the envisaged repercussions, and so on? And then that is the starting point. I'll give you some good examples, real life examples. As at 31st December 2018, inland revenue collection was around 900 billion. Customs revenue was around 919 billion. And excise duty collection was around 540 billion. So we had a revenue generation of around 2.4 trillion, almost 2.4 trillion as of December 2018. But due to COVID-19, definitely now 2019 figures we don't have, but definitely 2020 figures will come down dramatically. But government expenses will remain virtually unchanged. So how can we overcome this? How does the government formulate policies not only to overcome these issues, loss of revenue, but also they have to make other payments to keep the economy moving? So what are the policies? From another perspective, from another dimension, exports are coming down and virtually no shipping and so on. But at the same time, we have to import essentials into the country. So then the trade balance would be widened further and our export earnings will come down. Then what would be the impact on our economy? Rupee, definitely rupee would be depreciated due to these issues. So then what is the policy of the government to move forward? So because when they formulate these policies only, we have to really come up with the other strategies for the other sectors. Having said that, now also there are certain emerging arenas. During COVID, we witnessed certain industries are coming up, especially the delivery industry. So there's a huge potential for that in time to come. So that should be taken into consideration. Also, we see some of the online programs are emerging due to COVID-19 lockdown. So it's another area where we can focus on. And also from another perspective, now we never expected COVID-19. Even in our deepest dreams, we never imagined this type of a situation. So my envisaged position is when we formulate policies, we have to even envisage certain totally unexpected scenarios in time to come. Example, if there's a bioweapon, say, or if there's a bacteria developed to destroy our tea industry and to curtail our tea exports, what is the government policy? How are they going to act? What would be the repercussions or the negative impact? So all these things should be now taken into consideration for future policy formulation as well. So there are lots of thought dimensions or totally unexpected dimensions we have to look into when formulating policies as a nation. And also we have to benchmark some of the other countries, what they do, how do they overcome this type of situation, what is the action they have taken in this scenario, and all these things should be taken into consideration to formulate policies. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Trevor, for that initial thought sharing, which gives us lots of insights, lots of food for thought. So now let me turn to Mr. Nihal Ranasinghe. I remember him being the former secretary to the Ministry of Education, but I knew him more as the Commissioner General of Immigration and Immigration. And I remember his final year project at the MPA program resulted in having the online visa system established. So that's the power of a superb final year project, which is really, really nationally relevant. So, so let me invite Mr. Nihal Ranasinghe, who is now a senior consultant to SLIDA, to share some thoughts about a policy perspective with regard to COVID-19.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening to everyone. When it comes to COVID-19, I wish to call it COVID-19 plus plus, because when it comes to government service, the motto is that it should be sustainable social and economic well-being for the citizens. So this, based on that bottom line, the entire government structure has to operate effectively and efficiently. So in that context, there are three main components in the whole government. That is the public sector and the private sector and the civil society. These three key components taken together to form the governance structure in the country. So when we consider any development or policy effort in a relevant field, we need to not only concentrate on the local context, but also the international context because we are now in a situation where we need to consider local factors and local circumstances as well as global circumstances. So the COVID pandemic is basically was emerged in a different part of the world, and we were basically succumbed already. So therefore, when it comes to considering policy perspectives, first of all, we need to identify the role of the government. The role of the government consists of three main components. That is, the first one is the government is there to regulate certain structures in order to ensure social and economic well-being of the people. And the second element is the facilitation. So the government is the main arm of the entire structure. So therefore, whatever policy initiative that should facilitate the other sectors and other aspects and other components of the entire structure. And the third aspect is guide and then facilitate and then regulate. So guidance is the other aspect in the entire government role. So why I am telling these three components are very important. When it comes to sustainable economic and social well-being, we need to ensure that the systems, procedures, rules and regulations, these three key components compose the entire government operational structure. Rules in the top, and then coming down to regulations, and then the systems, and then the procedures. These four key components compose of the entire government delivery structure. So now post COVID-19, we have some, as Dr. Trevor very clearly mentioned, it's a huge threat that we are facing in the near future. That is, how can we ensure the revenue collection that is required to compensate the expenditure requirement, which is indispensable in the current circumstances. So if you want to ensure sustainable economic and social well-being, the revenue generation is very, very pivotal. So every policy initiative or every policy reform exercises must focus on creating revenue or creating assets or creating wealth. Then and then only we can consider or we can think of expenditure side of the entire exercise. Therefore, now since the external sources are basically becoming limited, the internal sources must be basically promoted with the private sector, with the civil society and the government structure, so that we can generate a sizable amount or volume of revenue to compensate the requirements. So in this whole exercise, my personal opinion is that the government agencies, ministries, departments, corporations, and other statutory bodies must revisit their systems and procedures, not only the systems and procedures, but the laws, rules, and regulations. These are basically very important, and there should be immediate action to take basically certain serious thought on transforming and reforming these key structures in order to accommodate the new requirements and new management perspectives, so that the development results can be achieved medium term, short term, and long term basis. Otherwise, the amount of resources that are basically made available is very limited, and we need to ensure that the maximum utilization is basically taken care of when it comes to managing the resources. So the government, the senior government officers' trust area should be basically not merely by administering the day-to-day operations, but they should concentrate on management for development results. The entire public service should be geared towards managing the resource base that is available for ensuring the development results. So therefore, every aspect of the government and every structure of the government must be realigned to revisit the existing systems and identify the gaps which are available at the moment, and also identify the strategies, basically ways and means to fill these gaps so that the economic and social well-being is ensured in the short run, in the medium run, and in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nihal, for that wonderful explanation. And I would always say actions speak louder than words. The way you transformed the immigration department, the Department of Immigration and Immigration, is a classic example of what can be done within the public sector, what is possible within the public sector. Rather than saying no and being negative, it's a case of saying yes and being positive. So the tremendous transformation that was made possible, and you were a vital part of that, is a classic case. What you mentioned is really possible. And I really like the way you mentioned about the triangle, the government, the private sector, and the civil society. Yes. They all have to work together in focusing on the development of the country. So it's all about development imperative. So developing the country has to be the top in the agenda, because we need to move from a middle income level to a higher level to ensure socio-economic upliftment of the nation. Thank you very much. And now let me turn to Mr. Lakshman Abesekara. Hearty congratulations. You were recently appointed as the chairman of the Sanasa Development Bank. And it's another feather in PIMA cap, because having being in existence, PIM, for the 30 plus years, we have produced 300 plus CEOs, 3,000 plus senior managers, and 30,000 plus trained professionals one way or the other. So Lakshman, you're also getting into that prestigious leader level, chairman level. We have a couple of chairmen right now who are prestigious PIM products. We featured Mr. Sujiva Rajapaksa on our first webinar, being the chairman of the People's Bank, and now Mr. Lakshman Abesekara. So Sanasa is playing a pivotal role for the socio-economic well-being of the country. So Lakshman, for your thoughts on policy perspectives.
Thank you very much, Professor. Sri Lankans are resilient. I'm sure that we should be able to come back. And Dr. Trevor talked about the revenue losses, and on top of that, we have a stress situation on the debt repayment of the country. Now, when you look at the overall picture, I think our friend Nihal touched upon the need of national policy framework and also the rational allocation of the subject. So those are, and the bureaucracy. So that has to be streamlined. Immediately we had to do it. And in this, there are positives also. Now, when you look at the experience of the task forces, especially the health sector. Now, from PHI to the Director General, they work together and they coordinate with other agencies and other stakeholders and manage this situation. On the other hand, now the government has set up another task force for the economic revival and development. So they are looking at different aspects, and all are working like EDB, BOI, and other agencies together. As he said, now the government, private sector, and the civil society. So I will add another dimension to this, the cooperative sector of Sri Lanka. Now I met the commissioner of the cooperatives last week. He said during the COVID period, the cooperatives have taken the lead on the food distribution. So I think not only the food distribution, not only this particular situation, even earlier, whenever we had problems, the cooperative sector was the main food delivery channel, but they should not limit for the food delivery, but they must get into the manufacturing and also the supply chain. And when we are talking about the social aspect, the unemployment and also the poverty levels. The poverty level is increasing and unemployment of also increasing. So we have to seriously look at the labor, because labor reforms is needed for the growth. But so what is the balance? So we have to really look at a social safety net if we have to do this. And also we have to really look at the number of holidays that we have. So those are hindrance to the development. So at policy level, we have to look at the reforms of labor also within a short period of time. It also has to be a private sector, public sector, and the unions and the civil society must get together and have a win-win situation. Within a short period of time, we have to look at that. And when you're talking about the finances, now there is a limitation of debt capital, because most of the companies also now taken loans, and there is a limit. I think Sujiva Rajapaksa also discussed about this, a need of an equity fund and a venture capital. So where the government, private sector, the banking sector, and everybody can come together. And also short term, we have to look at the sustainability and revival of especially the SME sector. So the packages initiated by the government, especially the 4% interest working capital facility. So there is a discussion going on whether it is sufficient. Right? We feel it is not sufficient. There is room to improve, and the policymakers must do it immediately, because otherwise the liquidity and the cash flows for the finances system would be affected. So the SME sector, not only finances, we have to look at the capacity building. The professional organizations like PIM and CS Sri Lanka, AT Sri Lanka, we must come forward. As he said, the civil society and the professionals must come forward now. Because to have a sustainable SME sector, we need to support them on the accountability, transparency, and also other management areas. Now, currently, there is a discussion on obtaining loans without collateral, especially the SME sector and the cooperative sector. So as you said, Sanasa is a organization created by people in villages. So we have initiated collateral-free facilities for cooperatives and also the SMEs. But SMEs, we requested the chambers, professionals, and those who are in the supply chain to make some recommendations for the finance industry to get some comfort. But we are willing to do that, and we have initiated that program. On the other hand, there is a discussion in so many committees to create a credit guarantee insurance institute, where the ADB has initiated and KPMG proposal is there. The government is willing to relook at that. We are going to submit it by updating it. And also policy level, the government has taken a decision to maintain the interest levels at a one-digit level to support industries. So those are the policy levels. I think, as Nihal said, we all must work together and do it immediately within a short period of time, without because otherwise we won't be able to achieve this. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you, Lakshan. It is very interesting and very encouraging to see how banks like Sanasa are really reaching out to the affected business community and the rural community. And then SME is a critical sector which contributes to more than 51% to the Sri Lankan economy. So we need to look after them. And it is not a case of being rigid, but being flexible. I think that's a very encouraging sign, the way you think, and I hope with your leadership, your bank will act accordingly. So it reminds me what I read in Forbes magazine the other day. It reconfirmed what I was thinking about post-COVID-19 leadership. It talks about the leader in any sensible organization in taking the organization forward with post-COVID-19 pandemic has to be demonstrating 3 H's. A leader has to be holistic, leader has to be humble, leader has to be humane. You got to have that holistic view. You got to be humble in being down to earth, in connecting with people. And you need to have empathy in showing your humaneness. So I'm sure we have 3 veterans here. And then my second round of thought sharing, let me start with Dr. Trevor Mendes. Any insights about the leadership with regard to the policy making? So what is your advice to the leaders at the helm, basically policy making level? What are the tips or suggestions that you would give in elaborating further, Dr. Trevor, what you had been mentioning? What are the key things that they need to keep in mind?
Yes, basically, we have to have as a nation, I have mentioned this in so many times, we have to have at least 7 to 8 policies as a nation: agriculture policy, energy policy, education policy, health policy, foreign policy, trade policy, and so on. And then generally this type of scenarios or disaster management and that type of things can be embedded into such policies as short term, as Mr. Ranasinghe correctly said, short term, medium term, and long term. There can be instances where, but this COVID-19 was, as I told you in the earlier stage, that totally unexpected. So we can't, but still now we can have that. But unfortunately, Sri Lanka doesn't have proper long-term policies. We have all short-term policies. So the first thing is that as a nation, we have to have long-term policies at least for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. That is the first thing. And those policies have to be well thought and meticulously planned. And like you can't just, I don't know, my personal view is by merely forming a task force, you can't design policies for the next 10 years or 20 years. You have to have this strategic thinking. You have to benchmark other top countries. As an example, Japan for the next 20 years, Singapore 20 years, Germany 15 years, like that. So you have to really think long term, not up until whatever next year or next August or whatever. So like that is the second aspect. And also you have to tackle the short-term problems, medium-term problems, and long-term problems. Now, as an example, if you take UAE, about 2 years back, they designed their energy policy by 2050. And they intend to generate 37% recycle energy by 2050, up to 37% for the country. So this is how they look into for the next 30 years. So that is the third thing. And also, like, you have to have some kind of think tanks where, like, now as an right, if I quote a simple example, you can be a CEO of an organization, but every CEO is not a strategist. You get only 1.5% or 2% of strategists in organizations. So that's the thinking tank or think tank who can really design and reshape, redemarcate the future for a nation. So these are some of the things that should be taken into consideration to formulate policies for a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Interesting insight with regard to how you need to focus in going beyond the task force, having a proper set of policies which are continuing, which are sustainable, which have to be taken seriously, not to be thrown away from one political party to another political party when the political reins are changing. So they have to be beyond the petty party politics in terms of keeping the country in mind. So the country related long-term policy perspective. Very interesting. So let me now turn to Nihal once again. Nihal, with your experience in dealing with some of the government institutions, I remember we were having this regular conversation. Sometimes from an outside point of view, certain sectors within the government are perceived as being inefficient, ineffective, and sometimes insensitive, and they are prone for corruption, prone for a lot of malpractices. But you changed that situation. You were really a change agent within that uncomfortable, difficult scenario. So some success insights, how you manage as a leader to change, because we know change is the only impermanent thing in the whole world. Or I mean, change is the only permanent thing. Everyone else is changing. So what made you to be a real change agent in that scenario? Some of those lessons might be very relevant in post-COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Nihal.
Thank you, Professor. Now, as far as I'm concerned, my personal experience is that now when we work with a group of divergent thinkers in the public sector, we need to basically, as a leader, I had three skills basically I practiced. The first and foremost one is the decision-making capacity. If a leader, he must be basically able to make decisions swiftly. And the second thing is that the communication skill is very important. We have to communicate with various groups and divergent people and in different levels. So the second most important thing is the communication skills. And the third one is the PR, public relations skill. So when these three qualities are taken together and mixed together, I think we can basically put everything into practice through that leadership skill. So I personally feel and believe that in the public sector, there are different levels. There are different levels with a given set of tasks, procedures, rules and regulations. So they are basically pursuing their tasks within those parameters. So therefore, sometimes attitudinal, basically attitudinal coherence is very important. Positive attitudinal coherence is very important from top to the down level in the organization in order to deliver what is anticipated by the stakeholders. So that, of course, is a very important concept that any leader should bear in mind. So there are two things when it comes to government service delivery that we should focus on. First one is the conceptualization. Conceptualization in the sense that is basically related to the vision. So that is something to do with the leader and the top management. So we need to always focus on the things that are happening outside the organization which are relevant for the time being and also in the future. So therefore, we must be mindful about those things when we drive an organization, even maybe public sector or the private sector. Irrespective of the sector, we need to focus on these key elements when managing resources for the betterment of the basically stakeholders. Now, the other thing is the decision making. Now, most of the cases, the government officers are waiting for 100% perfect decisions, which will never come through. Only physics and chemistry or whatever mathematics can ensure that 100%. But 75 plus or 80%, if you find that the circumstances pave the way for you to make that decision, forget about the 20% that you feel might be going wrong. That time or the next couple of days will help you to solve the problem in the process. So therefore, that concept is very important when it comes to making government decisions, because the expectations are also basically changing. Now, today's set of expectations from the clients or whatever the customers might be changed tomorrow. So therefore, if you are basically stuck in a certain set of solutions, then your delivery will be basically not effective. So therefore, we need to consider all these conceptual things when it comes to government service delivery especially. We need to analyze and basically scan the levels of expectations of different groups. So we can't have a single solution or single remedy for all the issues that are emerging from the society. That I told you earlier, the civil society is so divergent that you can't have a single solution. So in a single organization, you can't have a couple of solutions for a same problem, because that only basically creates value within the organizational setup. So my personal observation in the public sector is that now, if the managers practice the decision making and the communication, communication skill also very important. There are things that you need to communicate well in advance, so that the fear psychosis is taken away, and also make confidence of the actions that are followed in the future. The communication plays a vital role in that case. And also public PR. You need to listen, you have to handle grievances. There are so many things to be managed. So in the set of procedures, you need to ensure all those things are basically embedded in the organizational culture. So these are very important when it comes to public sector service delivery. As I told you earlier in the beginning, the role of the government is the role of the head of the organization, and is the role of the individual officer. That is to guide, facilitate, and regulate. So in each and every stage or the level in the government structure, anyone can do these things, and anyone is called upon to do these things. Then only you can ensure that the government structure is basically meaningful for the external environment and its stakeholders. So therefore, I find that as Dr. Trevor mentioned, we need to identify key policy areas, key thrust areas when it comes to undertaking the development drive. That is the first and foremost one is the education and the health sector. And there are also cross-cutting issues in the development process, like poverty alleviation, gender balancing, and basically minor citizens considerations. And basically the other group is that socially disadvantaged people, differently able groups. So these things are also considered as cross-cutting issues in the entire development process. So there should be adequate provisions and perspectives to manage those things as well in the process. And basically my single word that I use to ensure efficiency and effective in the government sector is that be relevant every time. Be relevant. You be relevant as a person, and the resources given to you are also be made relevant. I will tell you an example. If the law is passed in before 1948 or 1930s, then that law cannot be relevant for the current circumstances. So you have to change it. You have to make it relevant. So how do you make it relevant? You have to change it, reform it, and then put into current use in the current circumstances, so that the stakeholders are hugely benefited. So that is very important in that case. Only one word you have to follow, that is be relevant every time, even in the private sector or in the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihal, for that very insightful thought sharing. I think I like the word being relevant. And we use the word employee care, we use the word customer care, but we hardly use the word people care. So we need to take care of our people, the civil society, because the government is there to serve, as you very rightly said. So that is in being relevant to them. So this is where the leadership should be visionary in terms of ensuring that you have long-term plan and you execute the plan in line with some strategic imperatives. Thank you very much. So may I once again turn to Mr. Lakshman Abesekara. So stemming from what you mentioned, how do you make valuable steps for entrepreneurship development? Because we need more and more entrepreneurs to steer the economy. So as a chairman of a development bank, how would you support entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka? So what are your suggestions and advice for emerging entrepreneurs? Over to you, Lakshman.
Yeah, Professor, now all are talking about a new normal and a simple lifestyle and a new economic model, and about the people from the village level. I think we have to focus the skills development.
Okay.
Yeah, and and there are so many entrepreneurs, emerging entrepreneurs there are areas where always they say the finance is the main key issue, but it is not so. So the professionals and others has a responsibility on this skills development, especially the universities, the professional organizations, vocational organizations, etc. And about the entrepreneurship, for example, CA Sri Lanka, now the professionals are taking the lead. We are going to launch a virtual incubator where we are going to connect the entrepreneurs and have a model for to support them, facilitate them, and connect the others. So likewise, the professionals also now coming forward. And a good model is the cooperative model, where it was a successful model, where we trust people and we have blend them. The NPL levels are very low, and now we have to go and upskill them. And because with this import restriction, there will be so many industries, local industries, and will come. And also the government policy also now but government is the main buyer of the country to promote local products. So therefore, we should be able to, if we get together, the upskilling and the capacity building is the key. The finances, of course, we should be able to facilitate.
Thank you, Lakshman. And now the questions have started coming, and a series of interesting questions. So may I straight away go into the questions posted by the valuable participants. Thank you for your keen interest and your enthusiasm. So may I direct first question to Dr. Trevor. Dr. Trevor, as an academic, what are the contemporary actions taken locally or globally to improve the course program structures or syllabuses, especially on areas of strategic planning? You can give a brief answer connecting to what PIM is also doing. Over to you, Dr. Trevor.
Yeah, strategic planning is so important because strategy provides the direction for the organization, even for education. So we have to now, if I connect that to policy formulation, we have to have a proper education policy from grade 1 to medical college. So we see the issues with regards to grade 5 scholarships, and then A-levels, and all these issues are there. And also we have to completely re-engineer the syllabi and various other curricula to be congruent with the global requirements. Now, as an example, in Japan, they hardly teach anything up to grade 3. And they have only 1 or 2 exams, but they teach ethics, values, and behavioral things, and so on. So like that, we have to benchmark some of these things and then redesign, complete that. I should not say redesign, we have to re-engineer, completely changing, making radical changes to our education system if we want to move forward as a nation, as well as to be on par with the other developed nations in the world. So planning is important. Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Okay, thank you, Trevor, for that wonderful answer. So the next question, let me suggest to Mr. Nihal Ranasinghe. It might sound a little controversial. Sri Lanka is planning to open up for tourists from August 1st. Is it a good decision? So since you were handling immigration, from immigration and immigration point of view, Nihal, how would you look at that decision?
Of course, that decision is okay, all right. Now, any even without the COVID risk or whatever factors, the movement of people between and among the ports, countries in the world is a indispensable fact, and it's very, very important for the economic and social well-being, the topic that we are talking about. So the movement of people and engagement is inextricably linked with the social upliftment or economic development of a country. So we need to consider, now we are talking about post-COVID. Now the pre-COVID situation is different. Now, we could have facilitated, basically a seamless facilitation was there, and people, they moved around everywhere, and there were certain improved set of facilitation pre-COVID. But post-COVID, now you have to be mindful about the conditions under which these people movement should be taken place, because this is basically there's a threat element. So in the threat element, there are two components: non-threat and unknown threat. You can manage with the non-threat, but you can't. It's very difficult to manage with the unknown threat. So therefore, we have to be mindful about the unknown, unidentified threat. So therefore, in order to ensure that that unidentified threat is very well managed, we need to follow the guidelines issued by the respective authorities, and within these guidelines, we need to establish the procedures and systems. As I told you in the very beginning, we need to realign our systems and procedures in the facilitation process so that these people can move around or come into the country. And even within the country, the mobility should be ensured while ensuring the safeguards that are adequately provided by the respective authorities.
So in other words, you had to do that with sufficient precautions.
Definitely.
That's the right move, subjected to the sufficient precautions being taken. Right. Thank you very much, Neha. So my next question is, from the participants, I would like to direct it to Mr. Lakshman. In fact, there was one question you have already answered with regard to entrepreneurship development. This question, I would like you to start, and the other two gentlemen can comment. We still see government is looking at infrastructure development rather than survival and sustainable development. What can the professionals and government department heads can do to influence the government decision makers? I don't know honestly whether the standpoint expressed is the right view or accurate view, but that's a perspective, that's a point of view. So the question is, should the government more focusing on infrastructure development, or should it focus more on survival and sustainable development? So that is the viewpoint of the person who asked the question. Over to you, Lakshman.
It's a balanced approach, because currently we need something, but on the long run, we need the right infrastructure, because without having the right infrastructure, you cannot have the base for the economic development. So only the issue is the limited resources, or where to channel these resources. So that is the debate. But as a policy, we need right infrastructure. So that is my answer.
Thank you, Lakshman. Dr. Trevor would like to add something to that. Where should be the real focus be on?
Yeah, especially when you consider the long-term aspects of the country, from the government, definitely they should have they should give the strategic intervention, technical intervention, economic intervention, and the intervention on security. Now, as an example, because we didn't have the intervention on security from the government perspective, you witnessed the repercussions in April last year. Because the private sector or the corporate sector will never invest in infrastructure for the others to benefit. So that the government should come forward. If I quote another example, real life example, South Korea, most of the Korean companies were struggling in early 90s and 2000 to come up to the global standards. But successive Korean governments intervene strategically, economically, technically, and in security-wise to protect, groom, and guide and direct their companies. Today, you can see LG, Samsung, K&M, Kumagai, Kia, Hyundai, all these companies are doing very well, and they are like, they can compete with any other multinational across the world. But the background for that was provided by successive Korean governments through these 4 dimensions. So this is how they have to really work. They should provide, that's why now policy making, policy formulation should also focus on, for the next 10 years, we will be providing this type of infrastructure. We will encourage so much. We will provide technical assistance. Then the corporate sector knows very well that, okay, this is the policy for the next 15 years, 20 years. Then they will, without any hesitation, invest, or we can even attract foreign direct investments or exports, and so on. Now, we heavily depend on apparel and tea, but we can easily go for trade specialization and identify few other industries and earn foreign exchange. that has not been happening. So these are some of the examples, because government sector is not in a position to compete in the global market. Most of the even public sector employees, as per my experience, do not know the level of global competition. So it's the duty of the government to, while educating and enlightening the other people about the global, because most of the state organizations enjoy monopoly status. So they don't know what's happening in the world. So these are some of the things that they should take into consideration to reform the public sector as well as to guide the corporate sector through various interventions.
Thank you, Dr. Trevor, highlighting the facilitation role of the government in a significant way. Nihal, would you like to add something to that discussion?
Yeah, Professor, now infrastructure development is a significant element that the government sector should undertake when it comes to facilitation. Because as I said earlier, the social and economic well-being has to be basically ensured only through creation of economic activities in the country. So when you have more and more economic activities, the civil society, the element of civil society can engage in those activities and ensure their individual well-being. So whether it is a big infrastructure or whatever infrastructure, that infrastructure has to be planned and basically executed while ensuring that the creation of wealth for the economy is guaranteed, because that infrastructure is, without the infrastructure being developed by the government, the private sector cannot establish their entities on that. And example, power sector or telecommunication sector or road sector, unless and of course the government involves in the big level infrastructure development, the private sector cannot operate. So if the private sector cannot operate, then the economic activities will not come in, and then that will trigger the other down the level. So therefore, what is important in this context is that the amount of resources that are at our disposal in the country's treasury or whatever. So the government mechanism will have to consider alternative options where the resources required for the infrastructure can be mobilized. So those things are the things that the high-level public sector officials must expose into. And as Trevor said, we need to focus and analyze the international situation, and then consider and identify strategies through which we can mobilize required level of resources to compensate the infrastructure development in the country.
Thank you, Nihal. In fact, that supplemented very well what Dr. Trevor and what Lakshman were talking about in terms of identifying the real synergy that you required from public sector officials with private sector participation, the holistic, broad international approach that you need to have rather than confining to a very naive local approach. Okay.
Yeah.
So the next question is very interesting. Then let me invite again Lakshman to begin, Mr. Lakshman Abesekar to start. What can we do to upscale SMEs with e-commerce and digital technologies? What should the government do to facilitate it? Again, that question can be answered by all three. Let me invite Lakshman to begin.
Yeah, now with this COVID, most of even the school children are now using technology. And I have seen the SME, the delivery service especially, using the delivery channels and the e-commerce, connecting the other parts. So it is now coming up. Only thing is the government has to have a planned approach to support this, but I don't think that we should really depend solely on the government. The other sectors also should be able to, the other partners in this. For example, with the supply chain, the buyer or the seller should be able to help them, or the banking sector should be able to help them, the professionals. So likewise, we should not wait until the government come and do the government can do the infrastructure, and it will take time. But we should be able to collectively, all the partners should be able to support them.
Okay, I think government alone can't do that. You need to have the relevant parties getting involved. Perhaps an agency like ICTA, ICT, Information Communication Technology Agency, the government bodies like that can be the coordination arms for such an endeavor. So over to you, Dr. Trevor, for your inputs.
Yes, I agree with Lakshman that most of the people are now using internet and various other e-commerce methods to improve. But at the same time, I would like to add a little bit of value to that. Now this also gets connected to policy formulation of the government. Now when it comes to central bank, there's a concept called quantitative lending and qualitative lending. Now central bank, being the banker's banker, can direct or include with the treasury about qualitative lending for each bank, a certain X amount of their portfolio for cottage industry, Y amount of percentage for the SMEs, and they can even reduce the, if necessary, they can even reduce the reserve requirement by 1% to facilitate this, as Nihal said, facilitation process of the government. And then to improve the cottage industry and the SME sector, because if you take most of the developed nations, their SME contribution and cottage industry contribution is huge, but Sri Lanka comparatively it's low. It's about 51% if I remember right. So these are some of the aspects. So if we can improve these two sectors through government formulation and using right methods by bankers, bank and various other mechanisms, we can really improve, because initially they want to survive. That's the most important thing. They want to pass the infancy stage of the product life cycle curve for this cottage industry and the SME. Once they pass that, only they will look into this internet or e-commerce or that type of thing. So that's the time they can really get in. But initially, that type of facilitation and guidance is required.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Trevor. Over to you, Nihal, for your input.
Basically, this is an important area when it comes to now, as Dr. Trevor mentioned, the digitalization. When it comes to introduction of the IT infrastructure into the process, government process or the private sector process, we need to be mindful about the selecting the appropriate technology. There are technologies available in the world, various types of technology, but we need to be mindful about the appropriate technology and interoperability. When it comes to government sector or the private sector, the different agencies are undertaking different roles and procedures or activities, whatever. And the citizen engagement can facilitate only if we have a type of interoperability that is guaranteed by the main framework that is looked after by ICTA or whatever the government apex body for that matter. And the other end, when it comes to SME and other things, what is important from the macro level is that the supply chain has to be guaranteed. Every aspect and every element of the supply chain must be established coherently, so that each and every stage the engagement of different players is ensured on a sustainable basis. So this can not be done only on the local context, but we need to be exposed into the international context as well in this case, because there also we need to focus on the expectation, the customer expectation. And that expectation, if you can meet the expectation through the entire production process, even by automating or whatever, then the supply is guaranteed, and there you should not worry about the lending or whatever, because the manufacturers or the producers are happy that they have a final room to reside in. So I think this is my personal opinion on that matter.
Thank you, Niyal. So I like the word interoperability, where you have compatibility, interconnectedness. As Lakshman and Dr. Trevor also very clearly said, this is where you need to have multiple role playing by the government with the multiple players getting connected. So in fact, we didn't realize the time has flew so fast. So we have even exceeded 1 hour, but it was so interesting. I was so fortunate to listen to all your valued thoughts, and all good things should have an end. So the final brief round, each one would take a turn in giving one sentence advice from a policy point of view to all business leaders and public administrators and to the civil society. So what's your message from a veteran's point of view? So let me invite Dr. Trevor Mendes for the final message.
I will just mention 2 sentences. Having a vision and without taking action is a daydream. Without having a vision and taking action here and there is a nightmare. Thank you very much.
So action with, say, a vision with action will really make the desired future. So that's what you said. Thank you. Over to Mr. Nihal Ranasinghe. Nihal, you have to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, my final word is now we are talking about the current systems. We have a set of current systems. So I like to add the word undertake a gap analysis, innovate, and re-engineer to be relevant.
Okay. So identify the gap, innovate, and re-engineer to be relevant. Interesting. Thank you, Nihal. So finally to Mr. Lakshman Abesekar, what's your final piece of advice?
So my one also related to that, we have to upscale, and also speed is the key. We cannot delay, we cannot have so many discussions, we have to take actions. And it has to be team effort.
So upskill in a speedy manner without just talking, put them into action. Interesting. Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Lakshman Abesekar. So I think it's a wonderful way of collectively sharing thoughts. I saw lots of harmony, lots of synergy, because we are all interested in making the mother Lanka doing better. We are all sons and daughters of the soil, and PIM being the nation's management mentor, we are in the process of breeding leaders. So we want to develop leaders with global reach and local roots. And we see 3 such leaders in action with regard to the veteran way of sharing their valued thoughts in the virtual roundtable. So I hope there was lots of insights for you to take away. And my simple invitation is, as the Forbes magazine recently highlighted, and I would summarize it as, leaders should be holistic, humble, and humane. So 3H approach, in order to ensure you have the proper policy framework, and within that you ensure a right kind of performance. So policies lead to performance, and which leads to progress, socio-economic upliftment of our country. So with that, let me thank my valuable panelists for their wonderful value addition, and all the participants who got involved through Facebook. And thank you, PIMA, for the coordination, and Jailal, Densil, and Ian, and all other PIMA Exco who got involved. And thank you very much. So with that happiness being the pride of PIM, that is PIMA, and let me pass the baton back to PIMA. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you, the holistic, human, and humble leader of PIM, and the excellent moderator. Thank you very much, Professor, for your time and your effort, and also excellent moderation of panel, Dr. Trevor, Mr. Abesekar, and Mr. Ranasinghe. So it's all about vision. Without execution is hallucination. That's what we got, and it has to be embedded with re-engineering and upscaling, as Lakshman and Mr. Ranasinghe mentioned. So that brings the end to virtual roundtable, the 4th webinar session that we concluded. just concluded. So let me thank a few parties who made this event possible. Addition to our professor and the panel. Let me thank Ian Iddamalgoda of e-learning for coming forth with us to basically make it possible in terms of providing the back end and the front end both. And then our committee member, Lalinda, for excellent communication on Z Messenger. So let me thank Z Messenger also, and Lalinda for sending messages out to our community about this. And then Dr. Viruli De Silva, one of our EXCO members, who coordinated with DFT, Daily FT, for our communications partner, our press partner. And then Chandana is Ekanayaka, Commissioner of Prison. He's also one of our proud alumni and also a committee member. And in addition to that, Ramesh Dasanayaka, then past President Dinesh Hamangoda, Nilufa, Nilam and Timira, and also, of course, our President Jalal Hewawasam. And last but not least, our PIM and PIMA community for being there as active listeners and participants. Thank you very much. And I'll wish you all the very best and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best.